afternoon. Welcome to this meeting of the Budget, Finance, and Innovation Committee. Mr. Sugg, could you call the roll and reveal who is here?
Blumenfield.
Blumenfield present.
Yaroslavsky.
Here.
McOsker.
Here.
3 members and a quorum, Mr. Chair.
Okay, we have a bare quorum today. For committee members and members of the public, my intention is to hold for discussion items 2, 8, 9, 10, 11, 13, 15, 16, 18, 19, 22, 23, 25, 27, 29, and 30. That's a lot of items, but then also we have a lot of items on the agenda right now. To approve for under consent, the intention would be to take 1, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 12, 14, 17, 18, 20, 21, 24, 26, 28 on consent. Obviously, any member wants to call those special, they're welcome to. Just to let folks know what this is basically about, item 1, it's just the consent items, it's just moving funding already allocated for grid that was approved in Public Safety Committee. Items 3 through 7, which we're talking about consent, they're linkage fees for properties that didn't need to pay the linkage fee to begin with for one reason or another, although we have a packed agenda, so we're taking these on consent. I do want Building and Safety to consider for future how we can catch these overages and report back to us sooner. Item 12 is just moving funding from one project to another in Councilwoman Hutt's district. Item 14 already has a recommendation, which is public. And then before we go to public comment, I wanted to put an amendment into the record for item 11, and the only recommendation number 1 of the motion was referred to this committee, and so I would be amending that motion to read, I therefore move that the City Council, bullet 1 is authorize the City Attorney to modify the settlement agreement to extend its terms for 1 year, moving the end date from June 27, 23 to June 27, 24, and to modify the settlement agreement to allow class members to sign up for benefits under the settlement agreement until March 27. Bullet 2 is instruct the Economic and Workforce Development Department to report back on a potential successor program to the settlement agreement that could expand the benefits to include services such as child care, housing, rental, utility assistance, food, and other essential living expenses, and ensure that these resources are not contingent on work or education path requirements. And then on, item 2 is, anyway, I think let's go to public comment right now. We'll have speakers, okay. So on 2, we want to note and file motion, the intention is to note and file motion 30A, and that is the Hernandez, Soto Martinez, Harris Dawson, inasmuch as funding for that program has already been allocated through other means, including the 2023-2024 adopted budget, and thus the recommendations in this motion are no longer necessary. Okay, with that, I think we can move to public comment. For the note and file, I don't think so, but do I need a second for that? I don't think so. Without objection, I guess.
For the amendment.
Oh, for the amendment. Yes, for the amendment.
Seconded.
Seconded, properly moved and seconded, thank you. Okay, now we'll move to public comment. We have a few speakers on the queue, and we'll move to that. Mr. Sugg, you'd let us know any instructions they need to know?
No instructions. We can start with public comment.
Great. So we'll start with Mr. Sachs, followed by Amaral Wheatley Johnson. And after that is Corey Patterson. So you can Mr. Sachs, welcome.
Good afternoon, Councilman Blumenfield. Is it just public comment, or can I comment on some of these items on the agenda?
You can comment. depending on how many items, up to 2 minutes for agenda items and 1 minute for general public comment on items, on issues before the committee.
Okay. So I was just at the Board of Supervisors meeting.
Sir, do you want to speak on the items? Do you want,
Oh,
which
on the
item?
agenda item? Sure, we could do that. So I'm looking at some of these refunds being claimed by some of these property owners. And I'm wondering, are these properties, have they been built? Have they been inspected by the fire department for the new fire code? They're trying to enhance the fire safety for some of these buildings. They're requiring, excuse me, building owners to install a new fire system that will withstand heat for over an hour because of the ability for the firemen to communicate with outside the fire chief or the person running the operation. So they're trying to install a new system. Quality and Productivity Commission just had a big hearing about that, and they were talking about optimizing the systems by using some kind of antenna system and creating a system that's fireproof for over an hour. And I'm wondering, since you have so many properties asking for a refund, have they been inspected by the fire department, by the people that are supposed to inspect these installations to make sure that they have the proper security system installed to help the fire department fight fires? Because if they're going to get a refund and they haven't installed the system, then you're actually going backwards. And that doesn't seem to make any sense, because the fire department and the police department are busting their ass for over 18 hours every day for all the calls, all the fires, all the opioid overdoses. So I'm wondering why it's going on with this refund. Now, my public comment is about need more quality in this system here. I like this item right here. It says L.A. repair. I don't know what the repair is all about, but I'm pretty upset about this equity. Why isn't there more equality? What exactly are you showing by equity? You need to have more people getting involved in the running of the government, not less people getting involved in running the government. You almost have no community impact statement on any of these items. Why is that? And I'm wondering why you cannot issue MICLA funds anymore. You issued MICLA funds, the city issued MICLA funds for the building at the corner of First and Grand. They issued $1 million in MICLA bonds. Why can't they do that again?
Thank you, Mr. Sachs. Next is Emerald Wheatley Johnson, followed by Corey Patterson, followed by John Q. Lee.
Hello, I'm speaking on agenda item number 2 as well as general public comment.
Okay, you have a minute for the item and a minute for general. Go ahead.
Okay. My name is Emerald Wheatley Johnson, and I'm an organizer with Los Angeles Community Action Network. I am here to support agenda item number 2, but that does not go without saying that more should be done to hold the receiver accountable as far as tenancy goes. Tenants don't really know what's going on with the receivership. There's a lot of miscommunication, and there needs to be more transparency throughout the process. So while giving this $10 million is very important so that needed repairs can be done, as well as tenants having more support staff as far as case managers and property management, there should be more transparency during the process, as well as holding the receivership accountable. Thank you.
Thank you. Corey Patterson, John Q. Lee, and Mickey Jackson.
I too signed up for item number 2, if I may add to my general comment time too.
Sorry.
I also signed up for item 2 to comment on before the adoption, if I can comment on that too.
Yeah, go ahead, you have 1 minute for item 2.
Thank you. First of all, my name is Corey Patterson. I am a Skid Row Housing Trust resident for the last 6 years and 11 days. I have been a receiver, part of this receivership. In the last 90 days, there have been no improvements. The improvements that have been made are in rooms that are vacant. There are rooms that are being propositioned to people that don't even have permanent supportive housing or HACLA vouchers. We have a roof in our particular building, the Lincoln, that has leaked for 5 years now, has never been fixed. Today was the first day I've seen anybody from the receivership directly in our building, and I contend that only because last night I sent out an email stating advocate support to come and speak on this behalf. We do speak in honor of this $10 million loan, but we do request that it be to a receiver that is hearing the needs of the tenants. Part of our rights are being violated. I have been violated guests as of even this afternoon coming in by management. And so part of that funding, we'd ask for appropriate representation, communication from residents.
Great,
Same thing on general counsel, or my general comment is, I was in that status update meeting 2 weeks ago, spending $900,000 and $400,000 and $400,000 on security that for the last, just Sunday night, an hour and a half, could not get a trespasser out of our building is not adequate funds. Spending $70,000 on an IT bill when we don't have Wi-Fi in our buildings, we don't know where all these funds are going. We also, I know, $220,000 staff expenditure for payroll, but we have managers, we have janitors, we have maintenance that are all the same people that worked for Skid Row Housing Trust doing all the same things. We need help, and we need to be listened to. But I do agree these funds need to be done because these buildings are in shambles. I sit on our resident advisory council for the last 5 years. I've probably been in more buildings than anybody else in that organization at this point. A lot of them are in shambles.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Next is John Q. Lee, followed by Mickey Jackson, followed by Candida Centio.
Mr. Chair, members of the committee, good afternoon. My name is John Lee, the other John Lee, and I am a former representative of Mark Adams and Cal Receivers. I resigned on June 23rd so that I could speak before this body as an individual that worked in this building alongside of you for 20 years. I worked for 2 council members, one of whom became the council president, and Mayor Richard Reardon. And I focus mainly on housing policy. So I stand before you today on item 2. I oppose it. Court-ordered receiverships require vision, courage, fidelity, and more importantly, patience, even in a citywide declaration of emergency. The property owners in the trust should be held accountable through the receivership. The item before you today is tantamount to a bailout. And I ask this committee, you're going down a long road. Do I get my 1 minute of public comment?
You can have 1 minute of general public comment.
I'd ask this committee to think long and hard about the road you're going down, because relying on public subsidies kind of obfuscates the necessity of doing the receivership. And lastly, I think it's your prerogative to be critical of Mr. Adams, but I'd ask that we be fair about it. So I want to go on the record to say that in 1995, it was Mark Adams who came to the city of Los Angeles to help create the systematic code enforcement agency that was in the housing department. It was Mr. Adams in the late 90s that helped put together the draft language for the California state law that allows receiverships to happen in the first place. All on his own time, all on his own dime. So I'd ask, you could be critical of him, but don't ever question his heart or resolve or commitment to help LA. Thank you for the chance to speak with you.
Thank you. And just to clarify, you said you are no longer a paid representative of Mr. Adams, is that correct?
I'm sorry, I didn't hear.
You are no
I
longer.
am not. I resigned.
Okay.
I'm speaking as an individual and
Okay.
an Angelino and a longtime City Hall staffer.
Great. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Mickey Jackson, followed by Candida Centio, followed by Deanna Alfaro. as the last speaker.
General public comment and item 2. Mickey Jackson.
Go ahead.
I'm speaking on behalf of AIDS Healthcare Foundation, Healthy Housing Foundation. We are just baffled by what is going on with Skid Row Housing Trust. It's kind of not real transparent. People are suffering. We, AHF, offered $100 million to the city to help with problems like these, various housing problems. Nobody talks to us, nobody gets back to us. We've called repeatedly to say we have the resources and we have the know-how. We have housed over 1,400 people in LA in the last 3 to 4 years, more than anyone else, including the city. And we have the know-how to do this, to fix these things, to get them up and running, to get people into good conditions. Nobody answers, nobody calls us back. We're just baffled.
Thank you. Next, Candida
So she can get 1 more minute for general public comment.
do you have a minute for general public comment?
Yeah, I seem to be having trouble with the timer today. And we are always at the ready to help. I don't know anyone else who comes down and says, we want to help. And every person we've housed, every building we have rehabbed has been on our nickel. Not 1 cent from the city, not 1 cent. And we find it just amazing that this is rejected while you, I don't know a better word, flounder with receiverships and giving, a loan and all of this kind of stuff. Let's work together and get people in better condition. Let's get people safe.
Thank you. Candida Centillo, followed by Diana Alfaro.
Thank you for letting me speak today. My name is Candida Centillo. I am 3rd generation of voter registration rights, and please vote yes on LA Repair preparatory budget. Vote yes on the community ideas. Vote yes on the power of the people. Real people are making real decisions about real money. I urge the committee and the council to approve this report without delay so that our community voices can be heard. This is LA's first preparatory budget project, the first time that the community have been able to decide for themselves on how dollars should be spent. The proposal before you were ideals lifted up and voted on regular people in Boyle House, Southeast LA, Missionary Hills, Panorama City, North Hills. This identifies rental assistance, community health. I signed up for general too.
Okay, 1 minute for general public comment.
Community health, after-school programs, and as priorities. I urge the City Council to approve this report and support more participatory budget projects in the future. I also urge the Council to increase the funding for this program. As report notes, the lack of financial support to the advisory committee members is a significant barrier to their full participation and to the program's core values of empowering the community. We should ask people to work. We should not ask people to work for free to support underserved communities. I know that is not the intention and hope that we can resolve this. Please vote yes on LA Repairs preparatory budget. Vote yes on these communities' ideas. Vote yes on people's power. Real people are making real decisions about real money. Thank you.
Thank you. Diana Alfaro.
Good afternoon. On agenda item 8. Hi, my name is Diana Alfaro, and I'm the Associate Executive Director at Central City Neighborhood Partners. I come here today to urge the committee and the council to approve the LA Repair Participatory Budgeting Report from LA Civil Rights. This is LA's First, participatory budgeting project, the first time that communities have been able to decide for themselves how city dollars should be spent. CCNP is proud to operate Westlake Peace and Healing Center and has documented over 733 healing hours to 476 unduplicated community members. I urge the City Council to approve this report and support more participatory budgeting projects in the future. These projects are instrumental and directly impact the communities we serve. Thank you.
Great, thank you very much. That's it for the folks who have signed up as speakers. I know Councilwoman Hernandez is here and would like to say a few words before we get started. Mr. Hernandez, if you'd like to come forward, we'll give you the floor for a little bit. Whatever you prefer. You can come to the table if you like.
Thank you, colleagues. Thank you, Chairman, for your time today. Colleagues, I'm here to ask for your support to allocate $1.5 million from the opioid settlement to fund harm reduction resources in MacArthur Park. MacArthur Park is the epicenter of opioid use, overdoses, and distribution in Los Angeles. In 2022, there were over 270 EMS calls in response to overdoses just in the Metro Westlake Station and the surrounding area. We're anticipating those numbers to be even higher in 2023. Harm reduction is an allowable funding category according to the settlement, and it is the #1 way for us to prevent the deaths that are happening on our streets. We need to meet people where they are, and right now those deaths are happening in our streets, in the Yoshinoya Alley, in the Jack in the Box near the train station, at the train station, around this train station. And harm reduction resources, including naloxone distribution, allows us to stop deaths where they're happening and opens the door to long-term treatment. We believe that providing these services to keep people alive gives people an opportunity and hopefully a little bit breathing room for them to actually even consider stopping their drug use, and especially in this area that is such a high-need area. Until we can adequately resource this kind of service, we will not be able to address the crises that we're in and ensure that people can actually tap into many of the other programs that we're funding to aid in the recovery process. I'll be very brief and share that my team has been working diligently to begin to saturate this area with services that will hopefully prevent opioid overdose, but also to provide some of these services. We've been beginning to engage county departments, the county supervisors themselves, and our Department of Disability to really figure out how we can triage the access to services in this particular area. And you know, our district, we don't have places like Tarzana Treatment Center. That's a dream. You know, I used to go a lot to the one in the valley, and I know they have one in Long Beach and throughout the county, and so this is what we're trying to level up to. But in our district, there is really no place you can turn to get this type of care and services. So I'm really asking for the opportunity for us to be able to show that we can save lives and provide naloxone, supportive services, and so that we can also reduce some of the pressure that right now in that particular area is really falling on our police department and our fire department to have to answer these calls, especially for these opioid overdoses. And so we're not just, you know, we just don't have the ask, we actually have been doing the work with, again, our stakeholders, with county agencies and our city departments to really build a task force to actually implement this. So I just wanted to share that with you, and I urge you to allocate these funds so that we may deploy these resources quickly and address the ongoing opioid crisis that's on our streets, particularly in this trifecta area of MacArthur Park, the train station of Westlake, the Yoshinoya Alley, the Jack in the Box area. And I say these names because when you're from the district and you know that area, those names mean something. The Yoshinoya Alley has existed for decades, and so we want to do something about it. Thank you so much for your time and this opportunity to speak in front of you. I really appreciate it. Thank you.
Thank you. Appreciate that, Councilwoman. Okay, colleagues, I'd like to, unless there's an objection, to move on consent items number 1, items 3 through 7, item 12, 14, 17, 18, 20, 21, 24, 26, and 28. I went through earlier what those were about. Is there any objection to taking them on consent? Seeing none, let's call the roll on those items.
Blumenfield,
Blumenfield, aye.
Yaroslavsky,
Yes.
McOsker.
Yes.
3 ayes, and those items have been approved.
Okay, so colleagues, let's move then to the discussion items. We have a number of them. We're going to start with item number 2.
Item number 2, Los Angeles Housing Department report and City Administrative Officer to report relative to a request for authorization to lend up to $10 million to support critical building repairs and operations of the receivership and related matters.
I see our city attorney is here as well. Colleagues, I know that we had an extensive discussion in closed session on the overall issue. Today is more limited, and we need to keep within the scope of what's in front of us.
Good afternoon, committee members. I'm Ann Sewell, General Manager of the Los Angeles Housing Department, joined by the City Attorney and by John Heath, Chief Deputy City Attorney. The item before you is a recommendation that the city allocate $10 million from the Lomod Housing Fund, which is essentially old Community Redevelopment Agency money. As loans are repaid, it comes into the fund to be used for eligible projects, and all of the Skid Row Housing Trust projects were old CRA funded projects. To lend to the receivership estate of a proposed new receiver to take over the 29 properties that the city 2 months ago asked the court to place into a receivership, a health and safety receivership. We discuss in the report how we came to the decision that we needed a receiver, the actions that we took to request that the court appoint a health and safety receiver, and the progress that has or has not been made to date in that receivership, and what we did to do due diligence and research on the proposed changes in the receivership. The loan that we're proposing would be at a much more affordable rate than is currently being charged to the projects. And we've talked, I think, in other discussions about whether this was truly a loan and whether it will actually get repaid. And the answer is yes, it will get repaid. On some of the projects, it will get repaid by the limited partners that are taking their properties out of receivership and doing the repairs and putting them with new general partners. On 12 of the properties that do not have limited partners, that the city will be working more closely with to come up with a refinancing redevelopment plan, it will probably be repaid by other housing dollars that will go in as new permanent loans to those projects. But in any event, it will be repaid. So the two recommendations, one to move money into the receivership fund, and then the other to lend that out to the receivership estate, subject to a number of conditions that are detailed in the report. And we're here to answer your questions.
Great, thank you. Madam City Attorney, did you want to make an opening comment?
Certainly, I'll be brief. From the perspective of my office and me specifically, this is a difficult ask. We would not be here if we weren't persuaded that it's absolutely necessary to preserve the housing and the services for 1,500 of our most vulnerable residents. I heard some of the public comment. I'm not here to cast aspersions on any individual or their professionalism or their character or their heart. I'm not here to rehash whatever may have happened in other receiverships of the past. I am sitting in this chair strictly on the basis of what has occurred in this receivership and what has led to the unfortunate conclusion that we are asking and recommending that our city step up and put in the funds that are necessary in favor of a new receiver. It is as simple as we have yet to receive an accounting for the approximately $3.5 million worth of rent that we estimate that this receiver has collected since April of this year. It is necessitated by a number of unforced errors made by the receiver and this receivership estate that in some circumstances appear to have made the situation worse, not better. and it is necessitated by the fact that any funding from the city must come with a new set of loan agreements, loan covenants, and ability to control the performance and the reporting and the information that is made generally available to the city, to our other government agencies, and ultimately to the public. And so we sit here today asking you to please forward the recommendation for the $10 million loan contingent upon the appointment of a new receiver and a set of loan documents that includes the kinds of covenants that we need to ensure that we don't have a repeat issue. Thank you.
Great. Thank you. Yeah, no, the whole reason we're in this is it's a humanitarian crisis that we know at the end of the day falls on our lap as a city. Even though the crisis is not our doing, but we need to be aware of it and we need to step up. So I know you don't want to rehash things, but if you could tell us a little bit about the issues with this receiver and how Mr. Singer, the new receiver, would address these issues differently, just so we can clearly, I know we've talked about things in closed session, but what you can talk about in open session to let the public know why we're doing this. What are those issues within this receivership, if you wanted to spell out the main ones that are causing us to take this very unusual action, but something that we need to do?
Taking it from the top, the first one was that this receiver was selected in large part, not entirely. There was a great deal of experience that he brought to the table that was indispensable, and remember that he was selected in an environment where we couldn't necessarily conduct a thoroughly open search because we weren't sure what we were doing. But he was also selected because he represented that he would bring funding and financing to the table. Before we asked for his appointment with the court, I inquired as to what the interest rate was on the financing, and when told that it was 15%, my statement was, that's a deal breaker. At 15%, we need to find a different receiver. This was the day before we were due to file the ex parte application, and then I was assured that no, the interest rate would in fact be 10% for the first $500,000, and that we expected it to be lower for the permanent financing. To the contrary, the next tranche of financing at $1.2 million was borrowed at 15%, and we did not learn about that and were not told about it until after the fact. The series of unforced errors include the fact that 450 some odd notices, 3-day notices to quit or pay rent, went out to these vulnerable tenants. While it appears that the receiver personally was unaware of the fact that these notices were going out, in fact, it was his agent and his property management company who sent them out. And while it has been explained as an oversight and a mistake, that kind of error visited upon people who are incredibly vulnerable, who have no place to turn, and who show up at their door and are faced with a 3-day notice to quit or pay rent is completely unacceptable, especially from a court officer who promised that no one would be evicted for the non-payment of rent. Besides the funding and the 3-day notices, it has been very difficult to get reliable, comprehensible information from this receiver. As I think we told, as I think it was included in the report, we have a bi-weekly meeting that includes the federal government, the state, the county, and various city agencies and offices to go over what has happened in the past 2 weeks. As part of that process, we have been trying to get detailed, accurate financial information regarding the state of the receivership and regarding a plan for each of the units and what it would cost to have the units abated so as to be able to rent them out again. To date, we have not gotten a reliable report. The court had ordered the receiver to produce information regarding the payroll and security expenses that were due by last Friday. Instead of a report, literally what our office received was an email attaching scans of dozens and dozens of invoices. which were not in comprehensible form, and there was no report or summary or statement that would tend to explain what it was. And so, even as recently as last Friday, the proof is in the pudding, and even despite a court order requiring reporting, we still have not gotten the kind of report that one would expect from a financial fiduciary like a receiver. And so for all of those reasons, we've lost confidence that this particular receiver can perform. As for Mr. Singer, he was originally identified by General Manager Sewell. He was vetted by the Housing Department and by my office. I've personally communicated with the City Attorney for San Francisco, who gave him glowing reviews, and we have, to the best of our ability, done as full a diligence job as we can. He would not have been seriously considered in the first round, partly because we viewed him as being primarily Northern California, and we were looking for local help, especially in an emergency situation, and partly because he does not have lines of credit or funding or financing to bring to the table. At this point, I believe that the cost is more than made up for by even the performance we've seen to date, where we have a very detailed budget, where we have the kind of projections that one would expect from a receiver, and I have every reason to believe from my conversations with San Francisco that he is more than capable of providing the detailed financial information we need to have confidence that's what's going on with these buildings, with these properties, would be of the caliber of services that we would come to expect in this situation. And for all of those reasons, I think that we found it's very difficult to come and admit a mistake. But I do think that part of our jobs is that if there's a mistake, to correct it, and I'm here to do that today to the best of my ability.
We appreciate that very much. I mean, from what you outlined a lot of things, a lot of reasons, from the huge interest rates to real performance issues, to not getting the reports that we asked for, to the whole flub with the eviction, sort of more than enough issues that you've outlined that are serious, and we don't know how much all those things are costing us or costing not us right now, but costing the receiver at the end of the day, which is ultimately goes back against the units themselves. This is not, there's no free money here. When you borrow that money, you're borrowing it against the future rents of those properties, right?
Yes, although the idea has always been, council member, that what we would have hoped is to abate the buildings that were on fire watch. There were 9 buildings on fire watch at the beginning of this process. At this point, there are 29 buildings on fire watch. What does that mean? That means there's 24/7 security, which is the single biggest expense in this receivership. After 2 months, I would have hoped to have gotten the original 9 buildings out, not more than double the number of buildings that are on fire watch. It's also the case that as we sit here, I believe out of 500 units that were non-revenue generating, in 2 months, we've only abated, I think, 8? 30. That's an improvement from this time last
19 of
week.
which are still pending inspection.
Okay, so there have been 30 abated, but only 11 back online in terms of rents. And so what we're hoping to accomplish also is a little more urgency to the corrections, because some of them are quite minor. Some of them are as simple as putting an electric plate over an open socket before the unit can be restored. Others are a little more complicated, but out of 500 units, we originally had discussed with the current receiver getting the units abated within 3 to 6 months, and we are now 3 months into this, and we only have 30 out of 500 units abated. A rate of less than 10% is not acceptable.
And clearly, time is money, and the faster we get this, the faster we can be in a positive cash position. Are there standards decided on which of the 12 remaining buildings can be repaired versus demolished, and would demolition incur losses for the city? And if so, what are the estimated costs?
We have to be mindful of Wiggins, and that's the one legal issue. We do have a Wiggins settlement agreement that constrains what avenues we can take, but with that, I'll let Ms. Sewell respond.
There's at least one building that has had a fire that may render it infeasible or undesirable to rebuild it as opposed to replace it. There definitely is compliance with Wiggins that we need to be mindful of, but it would allow us to, doesn't mean we can't demolish a building. It means that we have to make sure that the same number of units continue to be offered within the Wiggins settlement area. So I think the standards are primarily physical, code-related standards. The approach that the Skid Row Housing Trust had been taking, over the last 10 or 12 years, they owned 29 properties. Mostly they had been built, those properties had been built in the 1920s. They were purchased by the trust with Community Redevelopment Agency money in the 1990s. And over 35 years, as they aged even more, they needed to be basically redeveloped, refurbished. Many of them didn't have elevators, air conditioning, accessibility, bathrooms in the units, et cetera. And so the trust was one at a time, or sometimes two at a time over the years, seeking additional funding from the state, tax credits from us, and recycling them. And the newer recycled ones are the ones that have limited partners that are now taking them out of the receivership and handling the repairs and filling the gaps themselves. The older ones, have the trust not sort of fallen apart in the series of unfortunate events that happened, they would have continued one by one to redevelop those. And I think for us, the question now becomes, can we identify a responsible partner with good experience in managing supportive housing, or partners who will hold onto it patiently and operate it while we go through that process? Or do we need to do something more, big thinking about doing it more quickly, or deploying those properties in a different way in the interim? So we have a number of stakeholders working with us on that question. Some of it is financial modeling, some of it is stakeholder input, and we will be coming back to the council with that.
I've got additional questions, but I want to keep it moving. So, Mr. Kosker.
Thank you very much. Thanks for the report. Do I understand correctly that the $10 million gives us a runway of about 6 months, looking backward at what we owe and looking forward at the fire watch and other costs?
It does. The question that we don't have an answer to, if you look at the budget that's attached, is there's a TBD around how much we owe the receiver, the current receiver, as we change over. So depending on, as the city attorney mentioned, there's been about $3 million in rents. Depending on how much in excess of that has been spent, that needs to be spent to settle out the loans that are on the property, it'll cut into those months. So we've been saying somewhere between 4 to 6 months.
So we would have 4 to 6 months with this $10 million, with the expectation that we would be able to move properties out of the receivership and begin recover. We get to normal operations and also recover some of the loan.
Correct. We expect that in that period of time we would move all but the 12, what we call the trust only, the ones that don't have any limited partners. All but the 12 would be redeemed by their limited partners and taken, as the first group was approved by the court at our request, to go, so the partners will be responsible for repaying the receiver, doing the abatement work, putting them back online. The 12 remaining are the ones that we would have to play that role along with the state and other lenders that are involved in it.
So pardon me for asking such a simple question. We wouldn't expect that those properties that leave the receivership, that are relieved of in the 4 to 6 months, they're not going to be fully repaired. They're going to go to partnerships or ownerships that are going to make those repairs?
We are requiring that there be a financially responsible party to step forward and take the responsibility for making the repairs. The way we would normally do this is through a notice of abatement, okay, and an order to cure. If there's someone who's financially responsible, who's been served with all of those notices and has agreed to accept responsibility, we are more than willing to release the buildings back to the original limited partners.
So would then the would then the recovery of the loan amounts be, come over time, or would they come immediately?
The way we've structured it is that, understand, there's no building in this receivership that wasn't voluntarily put in. We had no opposition. So we spent the 2 weeks between being advised of this situation and the filing of the ex parte application really building consensus. And we told every group, if you don't want to put your building into the receivership, you don't have to. Here are the benefits to the receivership. And so in that time frame, everyone decided to participate. I think that one of the concerns with the current receiver is that, in fact, those buildings that have stakeholders with a financial voice do want to pull their buildings out. And one group has already done that. We've heard from a second group who isn't so sure and may be willing to work with a new receiver for a time to see if it gets better. But at the end of the day, yes, the goal is to return everything that we can. What might happen in the receivership is if the units are abated and can be brought back online, that increases the revenue on a building-by-building basis. And for those buildings that are below market, we can also apply to HACLA for an increase in the rents, either to market or at least someplace between current pricing and market. Everybody who pulls a building out with a financially responsible party has to repay their allocated and fair share of the receivership loan. So what that means is that I believe, although we haven't seen it, our current receiver is to have been keeping expenses on a building-by-building basis, as will the new receiver. And so each property carries its direct expenses plus an allocated share of the overhead loan, and the limited partners would pay into the receivership estate on the release of the buildings.
Great. Last question, I think, for now, but not knowing the profile of the property and what else, any of the properties, does our loan sort of have a preference of some sort?
Super priority lien.
Super
It comes
priority
ahead of
preference.
every other indebtedness against the property, except the affordability covenants and covenants that bind the city under Wiggins and other agreements, and except for taxes.
Forgive me, I do have another one.
Just to follow up on that, though, and compared to the current receiver's loans, we have a super priority over that?
That will be up to the court on Thursday, but part of the reason for the ask of you is to ensure that we can at least cash collateralize the amount of the loan without losing our ability to review the invoices and either approve or make objections to whatever is charged.
Chair Slavsky.
First of all, thank you so much for all the work you and your team have done on this, both of you and the mayor's office. I know that it's been a Herculean task, so thank you. Before I ask a couple of questions, I don't see how we cannot do this, and we don't have a lot of options. But I do have a question. So do you, and I know this is sort of a challenging question politically to answer, but do you think that this $10 million is going to be sufficient to cover everything that we need to get ourselves in a position where we can move out of receivership?
I think it depends entirely on two things. One is what this receiver finds when he finally lands on site. Because as I said, I don't feel as if we've gotten the kind of detailed information that we really need for me to respond to you, not politically, but with the level of certainty that I would need to respond to a question from a council member. And the second thing, honestly, is how many resources and how quickly can this receiver move? I'm going to go back to what Councilmember Blumenfield said, time is money. And so if we can move quickly over the summer to at least abate and bring the other units back online, so that, that's a 25% increase in the revenue stream, even at current rentals, without an increase in the rental amounts. That will allow, I think, most of these properties to break even. The difficulty is that right now, at the rents that we are collecting and at the cost of maintaining each unit, it's like that old joke, you can make it up in volume, but not if it's at a loss. On a unit-by-unit basis, the properties overall are about $200 a month shy. And so our ability to not come back for more money and our ability to be comfortable that this is all that's needed is also dependent upon the federal government and HACLA's willingness to increase the rentals to something that, if it doesn't approximate market, at least covers that $200 per unit shortfall.
Right, and what we talked about was that that's not going to be passed along to tenants. It's
No.
just pure housing.
The way the HACLA vouchers work, you're right, the rent to the tenant stays the same.
Right.
The tenant only pays 30% of their income no matter what, and the extra $200 would come from the government assistance.
So it sounds like there are a bunch of variables, some of which we know, some of which we don't know. You mentioned a couple of them. One of them also seems to me to be that this current receiver, we don't know how much we're going to owe him. So is there a mechanism by which we're going to get updates on how quickly the money, what the burn rate is on the money? Or is that going to be coming to council over the next few months so that we can just have an awareness of that?
Yes, so as the city attorney mentioned, part of our request for the $10 million is an assumption that we will essentially escrow what we think we owe to the receiver 1 with receiver 2, or with ourselves actually to go out through receiver 2. Receiver 1 will give all his bills, and then we will, to the court will share them with us, we will review them and haggle and end up wherever we end up. And the new receiver, you can tell just from the attachment of, the budget that he's done, it's incredibly detailed. And so he's, willing to give us weekly reports, everything that's going out, monthly reports. And we've been meeting, as the city attorney said, every other week. My own staff is generating an inspection report every week. The Housing Authority is generating a report every month of what they're putting out. The Department of Health Services is generating a report of what their case managers are seeing. So we've got a lot of things that we've already been receiving. We've just been missing sort of the overall picture from, of income and expenses from the receiver. So we will be putting all that together and sharing that with the council every month.
Wonderful, thank you so much, and thanks again for all the work on this.
If I could, I just wanted, because I don't want you to be surprised when we come back at some point. In the attachment to your transmittal, there's an attachment that divides up the trust properties. And there's a group called pre-conversion, 5 properties, 5 projects, 7 properties. Those are projects that the trust had started the construction work, and in fact finished the construction work in most cases, in sort of their biggest boost of production. That this was really HHH-driven production post 2016, and that's part of what caused this stumble. They lost leadership and knowledgeable staff at the time that they had this huge portfolio of projects going through. And so instead of earning fees on them, they all became liabilities as they held them too long, as construction costs went up, as interest rates went up. And so they weren't generating any income, they were generating losses, and their projects running $200 per unit per month short were also generating losses. Those are just as we're doing the fast track program that the council approved for others that are kind of in that category, we will expect that as those limited partners, the National Equity Fund, US Bank, and Enterprise come into us, we will have to do another version of fast track with them, not separately, but with the council. We will be sharing that with you.
Thank you.
Obviously, the fact that we're doing the loan gives us gives us leverage that we didn't have before, which is key to this. But last question, just to help assure the public that the vetting for this new receiver, it was a lot more. Tell us a little bit about how the vetting is different with the hopeful new receiver that is contingent on our loans versus Mr. Adams. Obviously, you had more time, but you talked to folks in San Francisco, but I want to put it out there how this is different and how we can feel better about sleeping at night knowing that we'll have a receiver who's being
My
responsible.
office started the process of considering a backup possibility something over a month ago. We weren't getting the kinds of reports that we needed. We felt as if the priorities of the receivership had been diverted into political issues rather than fixing the problems at the receivership level. We called over a dozen potential receivers. This was not a project that most people were anxious to participate in, especially given the difficulty of the assignment and the criticism in the press. From the original dozen or so, we vetted several within the housing department, the mayor's office, the city attorney's office, anyone we knew. My background as a restructuring and bankruptcy lawyer probably came in handy, and we were able to speak to any number of folks about recommendations. Of the receivers that we actually talked to and set up interviews with, there were only 2 that after the conversation about what was involved and the timing and what we needed, there were only 2 who were willing to speak with us about accepting the project. We vetted both of those 2 with prior assignments with other cities like San Francisco. Of the 2, only Mr. Singer has any experience in public and safety receiverships. The other potential candidate was strictly commercial receiverships for lenders. And I personally spoke to the city attorney for the city of San Francisco. I believe the housing department spoke to
The Mayor's Office of Housing. Yeah, we spoke with the Mayor's Office of Housing in San Francisco. Mr. Singer recently completed very successfully a project in the Tenderloin, which is their Skid Row. He asked all the right questions. He gave us all the right information. He asked for all the right information. He has experience in following this receiver and receiverships. He's experienced with the court. You know, just the ease of getting financial projections from him has been a real improvement.
And I think what I will say for the record is, and we obviously have not spoken to all 500 building owners or municipalities for whom he has done receiverships. I would expect that anybody in this industry, which is why I wasn't particularly troubled by 1 or 2 or 3 bad experiences with the existing receiver in the past. Because as with, these are very, very difficult projects. These are difficult receiverships to administer. And so there's likely to be at least 1 or more where someone has done hundreds of them where people are unhappy. So I can't tell you that out of the 500 cases, there aren't 1 or 2 or 3 or 4 where people are unhappy. All I can do is judge it on the folks that we spoke to, including his most recently completed project, which I believe was 11 buildings? No?
I don't think so. I think it was 1, but it might have been multiple sites, 1 project, multiple sites.
But in the Tenderloin district, and we've done the very best we can. And he has public and safety, health and safety receivership experience. He has regular receivership experience. He has glowing reviews from the city and county of San Francisco. He has, in presentation and demeanor and execution, all of the specifics that we have found lacking with the current receivership. And so we are as certain as we can be that this will work out.
Great. Thank you. Colleagues, any additional comments or questions? Seeing none, I'm going to recommend that we approve the LAHD report recommendations. And with that, could call the roll.
Blumenfield.
Blumenfield, aye.
Yaroslavsky.
Yes.
McOsker.
Yes.
3 ayes, and the item has been approved.
Thank you very much.
Thank you. Next item up is number 8.
Yes. Item number 8, Civil and Human Rights and Equity Department report relative to Los Angeles Reforms for Equity and Public Acknowledgement of Institutional Racism, or LA Repair Innovation Fund Participatory Budgeting Pilot Program Design and Voting Results.
Great. And this was waived from Civil Rights, Equity, Immigration, Aging, Disability Committee, and is here before us, so welcome.
Good afternoon. Good afternoon, Mr. Chair. It's truly a pleasure to be here with you all. And the honorable members of the Budget and Finance and Innovation Committee, of course, Capri Maddox, General Manager, LA Civil Rights Department. I'm going to pass it over to David
Ms. Maddox,
Price.
looks like you have a sore throat, or sounds
Yes.
like.
Having some challenges with my throat these days.
Awesome, thank you. Again, David Price. We're also joined by Allison Wilhite, who is the LA Repair Participatory Budgeting Program Manager. Members, before you today is the LA Repair Participatory Budgeting Cohort 1 Program Design and Voting Results, where we respectfully request that this committee affirms the participatory budgeting voting results and approve LA Civil Rights to enter contract negotiations with 5 winning community-based organizations for an amount not to exceed $3,064,712 in expenditures. LA Repair Cohort 1 included the following 3 repair zones: Boyle Heights, Mission Hills, Panorama City, North Hills, and Southeast LA. And these zones overlap with the following council districts: Council District 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 12, 14, and 15. The proposals before you today were selected by community members through a community-wide vote, and the winning community-based organizations that received the most votes are as follows. Boyle Heights Repair Zone has 2 winning organizations: Proyecto Pastoral. They will provide rental assistance for up to 70 families, including peace building and healing activities, as well as the East LA Community Corporation will provide rental assistance and services for up to 100 low-income at-risk tenants to prevent displacement. The Mission Hills Panorama City North Hills Repair Zone has 1 winning organization, which is the Cottonwood Urban Farm, via its fiscal sponsor, LA Compost, and they will open a new community garden for up to 100 families and expand services at its Panorama City site for garden education, composting, and materials. And then finally, the Southeast LA Repair Zone has 2 winning organizations, which are the Watts Empowerment Center, and they will expand after-school program for residents and community members at the Imperial Courts in Watts. And finally, Charles R. Drew University of Medicine and Science will provide a culturally responsive mobile street medicine program to provide primary care, mental health, and case management services for up to 10,000 individuals and families. And so we are very proud of the initial results of this pilot program. Participants have already explained how this transparent process is improving their trust in our government and makes them feel heard and seen. And so I'll pass over the mic to Allison, who will explain a little bit more of the numbers from the program.
Great. Thank you, David, and thank you to the chair and to the members of the committee. Wanted to expand on this to say that our report not only includes our funding recommendations and the voting results, but also gives an overview of the program design that we've been implementing over this last year. With this being an innovative program for the city, it's our first time implementing it. We're so grateful to the support of the community members who have been part of this direct democratic process with us. So we launched this program first in July of last year with our steering committee, and then we followed that up with our advisory committees, which were made of members that lived within each of these 9 repair zones and come with their own lived experience to inform and lead on our community engagement efforts here. With our advisory committee members, they then led through a series of meetings with us, a plan on how they would implement outreach and engagement for their specific repair zones. From September 1st through November 6th, 2022 is when we led our idea collection phase of this process, in which we went out to the communities and asked what are some of those ideas they'd like to see funded by the city, what would be some of the ways that we can best address the concerns that they've seen in their communities. The survey was provided in both English and Spanish when it was provided in writing, as well as we provided it online in 12 additional languages. That was through our Zen City platform, which is a civic engagement platform. Following the idea collection, we were able to collect over 279 entries from across these 3 repair zones, and those ideas were then summarized into what we call our program concepts. Each of the repair zones then had 3 key program concepts, which were the most common ideas that came up, and that then informed our grant guidelines that nonprofits responded to. So our proposal development phase was held during December and January, in which nonprofits could then respond to those ideas and provide their fully fledged program ideas that would then be considered for the ballot. Once we were able to review those options for the ballot, we completed our voting phase, which was held from March 31st through April 30th, in which community members were invited to vote on which they would like to see as their top funded projects. From that, we saw in Boyle Heights, 396 eligible ballots were submitted. From Mission Hills, Panorama City, North Hills, we received 791 eligible ballots. And from the Southeast Los Angeles Repair Zone, we received 1,216 eligible ballots. From all of this, we're very grateful then to see what our voting results have been, which is what we're presenting to you today. And then we are going to be continuing this process for our remaining 6 repair zones. We actually launch our next series with the advisory committees. Tomorrow night, we'll be launching our first orientation meeting with them. We'll be continuing this process over the coming year. We expect that we'll be holding the idea collection phase later this summer in August and September. Then we'll be able to open up our grant guidelines in the fall and open it up for the vote for these remaining zones early next year. So thank you. That's our presentation for today, and we'll take any questions.
Great. So now this is one-time funding, right? How are you conveying to folks that it is one-time funding so that there's not an expectation in the following year that you know, that they'll be disappointed if the money's not there?
Now, that's a great question. We did include in our grant guidelines that this is for one-time funding, that this is also only to be implemented over 1 year. So from the contract execution, they would have 1 year to implement their projects for their repair zones. We've also been very clear in our communications to folks, the folks we've been working with on our advisory committees and with our community engagement partners, that this being a pilot project, we do only have this funding approved for this first cycle, and that's why we would look for support in continuing if they would like to see it continued.
But would you say that most people assume it's going to continue?
Capri Maddox, General Manager, LA Civil Rights. There is a hope that these dollars would continue, of course. However, we have let the community know these are COVID dollars. These communities, of course, had the highest incidence of COVID mortality, as well as other factors. These are communities that have been on the wrong side of the digital divide, environmental racism, and a number of issues facing communities that are dealing with structural racism, right? So we want to be intentional to let folks know these dollars are not guaranteed, but we do hope that we can get additional resources, particularly from the philanthropic community. This is a proof of concept, and it has been very successful. So the community needs these resources, and we have to just figure out a way to continue them.
Absolutely. It's an incredible pilot to show that, and
Yes.
you know, it's that foundation model we've seen in community foundations that can really be successful. One of the tricky parts with all participatory democracy kinds of things is how do you, and I'm curious if this became an issue, how do you deal with the decisions, making sure that it's the most needy and sort of community-based versus just the most organized, which can sometimes be an issue because people, when there's money on the line, that sometimes the most well-heeled are the ones who organize the best.
No, appreciate that question. So when it came to how is it that we can focus on truly the community-based approach here, that's why we prioritized the selection of advisory committee members who come from the repair zone, come from with their own lived experience, various walks of life from within that community, as well as these community engagement partners, which are nonprofit or grassroots organizations, to really help us with lifting this word and getting it out as far as possible so that they are brought in through the city and supporting the city and getting this word out, and not just mobilized on behalf of a particular grassroots organization that might be with a certain focus. When it comes to the vote itself, we did build into our guidelines that proposers would not be allowed to do their own sort of outreach and collecting votes directly themselves, so we could limit some of that, as well as we limited them in how much they could spend in promoting their own project. That way we could try to keep it as best as we could, controlled through how it is that we're getting the word out through our efforts at the city, as well as through our advisory committee and community engagement partners who are really informed in the process and trying to keep it as open and inclusive as possible.
Mr. McCosker.
Thank you very much. I really don't think I have a question. I just have some observations. I was I'm really, really, really pleased with this program, and I was with you, with all of you, at CII, at Children's Institute, and we kicked off part of this, and I had just the immense pleasure of being around in the community and having folks tell me about their projects and ask me to vote on their projects. And one of the things that I think was really great about this is that not only are we telling the community that we're directing our money and our actions to combat the institutional racism that we've experienced over generations, but we're also building capacity. I mean, the mere fact that Imperial Courts did so well is remarkable. That's a tough place to organize. It's a tough place to get everybody on the same page, and I was there on Saturday, and I think word got out, they must have known, because I was there on Saturday for a soccer tournament, and folks were buzzing about, not the fact that the money was coming, they were buzzing about the fact that they won something. And it's really, really great. And I can't wait for this to be in Wilmington. Really, really pleased with what I saw in South LA, particularly in Watts. So thank you very much. I do want to know if we can have access to all of the different applicants, because I don't think I know all of them, and it would be really great for me to understand what the priorities were. It's a learning lesson for me as well.
We can arrange that, council member.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Sure. Mr. Oslowski.
Yeah, so thank you very much, Chair. This is really exciting. I was looking at the program evaluation section of the report. I'm really excited to see what the report says and how we can support ongoing work beyond 1 year. I think it's just looking at what was funded. These are all core important programs that we should be figuring out how to fund long-term if they're successful, and if they're not successful, how do we make them successful? So thank you for making this happen. It's really exciting.
Thank you.
Great, thank you. Seeing no additional questions, I'd like to move forward the recommendation to approve the Civil and Human Rights and Equity Department's recommendations listed in the report. Thank you. We'll call the roll for that.
Blumenfield,
Blumenfield, aye.
Yaroslavsky,
Yes.
McOsker.
Yes.
3 ayes, and the item has
Thank
been
you very
approved.
much.
Thank you.
Thank you again. All right, that takes us to item 9.
Item number 9, communication from the mayor relative to transferring opioids settlement trust fund and tobacco settlement trust fund monies in the fiscal year 2022-23 unappropriated balance fund for an extended residential drug treatment pilot program for people experiencing homelessness.
Welcome.
Thank you very much. Good afternoon, Mercedes Marquez, Mayor's Office. I'm joined today by Ed Gibson of the CAO's office, and also Dr. Estimea Gonifer, who is a consultant to the Mayor's office focusing on community health. We're here on an urgent matter. We're seeking your approval to transfer funds, the opioid dollars, to reserve beds with treatment centers that provide inpatient treatment for substance abuse and also mental health treatment for those that are ready to receive treatment. As we have all worked together on Inside Safe, as we have visited tiny home villages, a bridge home, we understand that there is a desperate need for treatment. We cannot successfully move people certainly from tents to interim housing into permanent housing if we don't acknowledge that we have a very serious problem and that some folks are just not able to go into areas, to homes, to motels, to tiny villages where they don't have more help and they don't actually belong in the tiny village. They believe in this treatment. So we are asking you today, as we did it during the budget process, to please move these dollars into accounts that the CAO will discuss so that we can begin. Our commitment is to follow a very thorough policy development process. While you are all on recess, and even before, if you have the time, we would like the Mayor's office, Dr. Gonifer, myself, to come and meet with all of those who would like to to hear specifically what your needs are. Every district is unique. And in fact, different parts of the districts also have unique needs. There's no one fits all. To discuss what your concerns are, what your needs are, the areas of focus, a tiny home village, a bridge home, other places. We would also be looking at all 35 motels that we're already in Insight Safe to understand how we would move all forward together on an entire program. But we are also hoping that while you are all in recess, that we would be able to begin by meeting with your staffs and receiving any information, providing information that would be needed to move this forward. Our goal is to work with treatment centers that are already contracted and vetted by the county. There are over 40. We say this because it is often the case that individuals who are ready for treatment actually need to be away from the neighborhood in which they are currently living, whether it be in a tent or it be in a motel or a tiny home village, that in order for them to succeed, they actually need to be away from the community that brings such danger to them. And so by our willingness to work with facilities that are also in parts of the county outside of the city, it would provide individuals on an as-needed basis to actually be placed in a situation which would be healthier for them and could increase their chances of success. Dr. Agonifer is here to answer clinical type questions today, and I'm more than happy to take whatever questions that I can that are not medical.
Great. Well, and I should say, I mean, what you're asking is actually is fairly unusual in the sense that you want to begin the process of engagement with us over the recess individually, but you want the money now. And that's the opposite of the way that everything works here. You generally speaking, and the reason why we, in the budget, we said we put it in the UB versus putting it into a special account was so that we could have not just behind the scenes engagement, but that we could actually have a committee hearing. And I'm very bullish on what you're trying to do. So I say all this at the same time because I'm also concerned about the process that we have here. In that we held it, and we were hoping that we would have, at this point, had a little bit more on the table in terms of what actually needs to be spent, because generally speaking, a department, they come forward with reports, we would be approving funding when we're actually at that point of, we've gone through the policy, we're about to issue the contracts, we're doing those kinds of things. So I do want to just put it out there that this is, we're entertaining it, we'll entertaining trying to do at least some of this, but it is a very different kind of ask, and I might bring the CLA up or ask CLA to talk about this a little bit more, because they're usually part of that process. Like we have no CAO report, we have no CLA report, we have a little bit of information, but it's not very different than what we had during big budget. But there is an urgency, as you're saying, and one thing we want to make sure of as well is that on this council we are not slowing anything down. Our foot is on the accelerator. So when we're working with you, and that's what makes this unusual as well, we don't want one person to be on the street a minute longer than they have to be, and we don't want anyone to have to be. We want people into treatment right away. So that's why we're even entertaining this very unusual approach. But if you could tell me what there's a lot of money in the different accounts, in the substance abuse and the tobacco settlement. Help me understand, what is it that's urgent? What do you need right away for the month of July while we're on recess? Why we have to go through this very unusual process? Because the other piece to this is that this really should be a hearing in homeless and poverty. They're the policy-making body. Unfortunately, it was so late that it ended up getting waived out of that committee, so they've never even addressed this policy as well. But we're being asked to put the money forward. So I want to make sure that we have our foot on the accelerator, but that we put only the amount that's truly needed in the immediacy. So if you could help me understand what is immediately needed that can't wait until we have a proper hearing in Homelessness and Poverty Committee.
First, thank you very much. I know that it is out of the regular order. And the best I can say to you is that we are doing everything we can to all catch up with ourselves, to put us in a rhythm that moves us forward, moving together. I understand that the first meeting of the Housing and Homelessness Committee upon the return to recess, I believe, is August 2nd, and that the first meeting of this committee returning from recess is August 14th. So we would seek to be on the calendar of both to come back and discuss this again more fully. What we need now, I understand. Let me talk about what it would be to have half of the dollars, nearly $11.7 million, out of the UB. Obviously, until the money is out of UB, there is no policy decision made that there will be a program. It's in the UB. In order for us to go forward and begin the process of speaking with all of these service providers to get them to commit beds, to reserve beds, which is very difficult to do, we have to have something in hand. We have to have an actual authorization for them to be willing to reserve beds. It's very, very, you all know, very difficult. So let me, if you would, sir, a minute about what it would cover and how we could begin to start the process of evaluating individuals and asking if they are ready to go in, whether they be in tiny home villages, in a bridge home, or in motels. Half of the dollars, just shy of 11.8, would allow us to help 373 clients who are at the 90-day mark to go forward. Or it would allow 186 individuals to go forward for an additional 180 days. So as you can see, these aren't huge numbers. So when you put that against the enormous need, we understand that as soon as we begin, we're going to start receiving patients, clients. And the worst possible outcome would be to actually make an offer and not be able to take them when they're ready. So we want to make sure that as we're speaking with the different service providers, whether they be, as I said, motels, tiny home villages, or ABHs, right? And we begin to match those service providers that provide inpatient care, that we actually can match numbers to bed reservations. And so that is why we're seeking a minimum of half of the dollars so that we can go forward and begin that discussion. But until you move money from the UB, there's no program. And so there's actually nothing that we can say to providers of beds that we're serious and
Well,
they should reserve beds. So you are making.
Yeah, I don't know if, I mean, and maybe I can ask Celia, but I would think you have the authority to, you can be negotiating the programs with the money. When the money's in the UB, it's designated for substance abuse treatment programs. And maybe, CLA, if I can ask you, Sharon, to respond to that.
Correct, Mr. Chair, that they could be working on the program right now. The money is set aside for that purpose. Of course, the council could change that purpose as well. But I think what the committee is signaling is that you are designating the money for this purpose, that the mayor's office could be working on the program now, as they could have been for the last 6 weeks as well, too, because the council did approve this.
We are working on the program.
So if you are working on it now, I don't know what's going to happen in the next 4 weeks, but I hate to use recess as a reason why this couldn't have moved forward, because we could have been working on it. If it was ready to go, it could be brought forward now in terms of the contracts that they're negotiating. What I'm hearing is there aren't any contracts negotiated yet because they're still working on it. It is somewhat unusual, is that the whole reason why the money was put into the UB was in order for this committee to make the policy decision, or actually to allow Homeless and Poverty Committee to make the policy decision on expenditure. Typically, what would happen is that this committee would be
addressing the transfer from the UB to the budget. That's normally what you would be doing. Normally, this would be something that homeless and poverty would be addressing in terms of the expenditure, the appropriateness, what the program is being used for, what the terms of the program would be. So it is a bit unusual to have this come forward to the committee with H&P actually waiving the matter. So I think you have a couple of options here. Maybe a question to the mayor's office is how many people are at that limit now, where you're talking about reaching that 90-day limit? How many of those are actually going to be reaching that limit between now and July? Determine the appropriate amount that may be necessary to extend those people, and then it could come back to the August H&P meeting for further discussion. That would be one option, but I don't know what amount that would be.
To that question, we don't have that number yet. I wouldn't begin that process. What I can tell you is that for the mayor, it is an urgent issue that we have the ability to go forward, that we have the ability to start negotiating contracts. We are in contact with, I don't want to give you the impression that we're not in contact with in-place service providers that are providing in-care treatment. We absolutely are. And that is why we have a sense of what it costs, of how much availability there is, of the levels of need that there are. We have spoken to many. The mayor has visited many facilities already as we begin looking at all of the budgeting. So I can't tell you how many are at the 90 days, but I can tell you that we're working on it urgently, and we want to move forward, and we will come back to you.
Right. And you certainly, and probably this is all part of the growing pains of new administration, but you shouldn't be holding back on the negotiations for this process. I mean, that should be happening right away. It should be happening as we move forward, and that way when you're coming to us, ideally, and you know, we're going to figure out how to get some money up front, but how you can be coming to us with actual contracts in hands that we can vet publicly, not just, you know, about our different needs behind the scenes, but we can actually have a proper hearing about and then maybe make those contracts a little better and whatnot.
I appreciate your comments, sir.
Yeah.
I do.
I have a million questions, but I'm going to keep it moving. So, Sheriff Slavsky, and it'll probably be a few round robins. So, go ahead.
Well, mine's less a question than a statement, so.
Go ahead.
Okay. So I think it's safe to assume that in the next 6 weeks, we're going to see some number of people who hit their 90 days. And if we don't give you resources now, those people will not be able to continue services. And we know that 90 days is not enough time. So, you know, my position is give the money now. If it's too much money, in 2 months or whatever, we have a conversation through H&H about it. But I'm frankly comfortable with this because I think that we know that there's so much need. This is a gap, right? At 90 days, the funding stops. And I was at Beit Teshuva just a couple weeks ago, and that's a year-long program, and sometimes that's not even long enough for folks. But their success rate is incredible, and they're completely privately funded now for that extra time. And so we know that there are people and organizations out there doing this work, and if we can figure out how to accelerate and expand that work, you know, with total due respect for the process and how we usually do things, I'm willing to shake it up a little bit, given that the status quo feels sometimes like a death by 1,000 delays. And so, you know, I don't want to step on the toes of H&H, but I think that this could be an iterative process. You're not going to spend all that money in the next 8 weeks. But if some of it gets spent down, we can, you know, continue to iterate as you move forward with creating the program. Thank you.
And certainly, I mean, I fully agree in terms of our intention is to make sure that you have enough money so that as we go through this, there's no slowing down, that we are, anybody that we're dealing with on this 90-day schedule that we want to get in there, that we're going to be able to make those things happen. But I do want to make sure that we have room so that we can have a policy discussion and the council can weigh in with this. And so there's lots of ways to do that. But before we start getting into that, we also want to drill down a little bit more about what are we actually talking about, because we don't have a lot of those details. But Ms. McCosker, go ahead.
Thank you. My comments and feelings are much the same as Councilmember Yaroslavsky's. I typically would be for following a normal protocol, and let's talk about the policies. Let's lay out the policies. Let's set some goals. Let's have tentative contracts, and then fund those. But here I think we all see the urgency of this problem, and I think each one of us experiences visiting the different service providers in our district and seeing folks that are going to time out without services. And especially my spouse, having been in the business and now in the business as a non-professional, but as a volunteer, she sees folks that are timing out right now, and without any services having been provided, frankly. And that's a problem, but it's a problem we have to solve. I don't want to lay blame anywhere. So I am for moving forward with funding now.
And certainly the intensity of the issue we all feel, and we want to make sure we spend the money wisely. Of course, there's a million ideas of how to spend it. Ms. Hernandez came forward with one idea, a particular area, and let's drill down a little bit more on the idea that you're putting forward today, that you want to get some funding in initially to expand some contracts. Who are we talking about that would be eligible for what you're hoping to negotiate?
Thank you so much for the opportunity to speak in chair. Given my experience as both a provider in Twin Towers, a community engaged researcher, and an educator, and leaning into the initiatives that we have been pushing forward, it is all Inside Safe participants in tiny homes, bridge homes, and those that are ready for treatment, whether it's detox or extending their stay within inpatient treatment. This is all within the arsenal of harm reduction methods, right? For those that are not ready to commit to inpatient treatment, we have all of the tools that our community service providers and LASA have been providing our participants. In addition to that, we want to make sure that for those people that are ready to pursue treatment, inpatient treatment, that we have that available. And so we want to make sure we hone in on that population.
I couldn't hear the last thing you said.
We want to hone in on that population that's ready to receive inpatient treatment.
And what about in terms of making sure that they're part of the LA homeless population? How are we avoiding what we often experience is all of our neighboring cities taking advantage of our programs?
Well, one, what you state, we know to be true. We know to be true. Without going into details, we know it to be true. Nonetheless, we're not planning a massive announcement, right, that this is what we're doing. And through the intake process, we will understand where they come from. So we're happy to come back and report to you what our intake is showing, so that if we see some odd spike in where folks are coming from, we will not only inform you, but we will also speak with cities, and we will speak to the county about that. Because part of what is new is the relationship with the county, a very open one, where it was non-existent before, about how we transfer services among us, how we share services among us, how we prioritize what it is the city should receive. It is a straightforward conversation, and one that we can only do by actually doing it and having the reason to speak to one another. So I can tell you, in the intake process, we will know. We will not do a kind of forensic look at intake. We'll be looking at it right up front to understand if we see trends. The other thing that is true, those of you here know, there are cities that are more likely to do that than others. We understand that already from Inside Safe. So we will pay particular attention in those areas where we see that as more of a phenomenon.
Okay. Yeah, we certainly know, certainly in your neck of the woods, there's a lot of that, and all of the areas that border other cities see a lot of that. What kind of metrics are we going to require in terms of, making sure that this is an effective program? What are the metrics for success that we'll be reporting to you and reporting to the council?
These are metrics that we would like to develop in concert with council members. There are a number of ways to approach the metrics. We want to make sure that, one, we keep folks housed, and together with you all, we hope to create some additional metrics. But to backtrack a bit. Sure.
I mean, that's good. Of course we want to do that. I'm a little concerned because you want those metrics when you do the contract up front, because we need to be requiring the goals that we're going to hit before we sign those contracts. So I'm a little concerned about.
Sir, I'm sorry, do you mean metrics as regarding the success of the individuals in treatment?
Well, individually, but also collectively, how are we determining? We're spending a lot of money. The key is we all want to help as many people as we can. Is efficacy in deciding, is 180 days better than 90 days, or all of these things, and how is our money succeeding, and what are those metrics that we're going to be requiring of the contractors, and in turn, what are those metrics that we're going to expect to see as a city, as a mayor's office, as a council office? How are we going to judge this program?
So let me start. First, we're dealing with folks that are already vetted, approved, and have experience in this work and are contracted by the county. So we're not, we're looking with people with a lot of experience. So partly what we would be doing is comparing the success rates that the county has. We're going to take a look. We're looking already at their contracts, what their requirements are, and we'll be working on whether we think that is appropriate, whether it's within appropriate medical clinical standards, whether we should be reaching deeper for success.
Right, but the county doesn't do this.
They do for the first 90 days. Remember
Right.
that?
Right. But
So-
they don't. But what we're talking about
Was going beyond.
is beyond, of which there's history. I mean, it used to be,
Yes.
and part of what makes this make a lot of sense. We used to do this as a government. The feds changed their rules, and it used to be a year, and so there are some things
There
to
are
look at.
studies.
But the county success rate of the first 90 days should be wildly different than ours. That's not an apples to apples comparison, because we better be doing a heck of a lot better if we're taking people from day,
certainly.
60 to 90 or a day to 120 than they're doing in the first 60 days. Otherwise, otherwise it's not very efficacious.
But those are also the standards that are set for service, for all kinds of things that people receive. The idea is to make sure that we are going with those that are vetted and everyone finds them to be appropriate. So we're not like, throwing out there, whoever it is. You have to have already been vetted. You have to already have experience. As you said, there are numerous studies, right? Particularly those that show why the 90 days don't work, and compare them to what success rates are when people have more time. But I'm not a doctor.
The metrics are unchanged. They're the same metrics that we are seeing in the studies for the 90 days. The outcomes will hopefully change when we are able to care for these people for longer periods of time. Together, we can look at other types of process and outcome metrics to decide and ways to evaluate this initiative, but we should not see a change in the types of metrics that have been trended over time.
And I'm assuming the idea of this is also, we're not just changing the pattern of who's in the beds, we're expanding the number of beds substantially, right? That's the
hope, yes.
Mr. McCosker.
One of the examples I would give is very particular to my district, and that's Beacon House in the Harbor area, which does a brilliant job of this. I mean, far better than anything I've seen in my 35 years of watching this from a distance and much closer distance lately. For example, though, Beacon House wouldn't have a set time period. It wouldn't be 180 days or a year or 2 years. It would be what it takes. Exactly. Is that what we're committed to in this program?
Well, we're committed to the standard of not more than a year. Unless, in concert working with everyone, you all have a different view. But at this point, that is, we're looking at a year. I could understand, though, that with some exception, there could be a standard why you would extend it. But we would certainly do our best to not do that. We would try to drive the result in this. And, you know, the issue is that those, as you know, that are there for only 90 days, their chances of ending up right back in the same encampment that they left are very high.
Yes.
And so what we're trying to make sure is that they don't return to being unhoused. And that gives us enough time for not only them to get their lives back together, but the more stable they are, the more opportunities we have for a variety of housing, right? The more limited we are in what they can accept, the higher the risk of failure is when they leave, right? And so it will impact the entire system, right? Because it will leave different types of housing resources available for people who have a higher chance of success. And that's what this is about.
I'm going to just put the cart before the horse for 1 second, not knowing how this vote comes out. In 30 days, it would be reasonable to expect that we'd have no matter whether we give you $1 or more, to know exactly, what contracts were signed, what beds were obtained, what the programs are, what the expected results are, and then just continue to get those reports as we move forward.
Yeah, yes, Mr. McCusker, that's why I mentioned that I believe August 14th is the first scheduled meeting of this committee when you return from recess. So we would hope to be back before you, if that is all right with your agenda on that date.
Absolutely. No, we'd love to have you back, and even more importantly is getting before the Homeless and Poverty Committee. Not that we're the most important committee, but they deal with that policy. We want them to be focused on that.
But as I said, we would be speaking with any staff that is here, and I know everyone would love to go when the city council member is gone, but those that are here, we'd be happy to start the conversation both with members, staff of this committee as well as housing, right? And then schedule you all so that as soon as you can, before the 14th, we would have already presented this to you in meetings privately.
Right. No, and two very different tracks. So yeah, we all want to work behind the scenes, but we want to have this public process to get the input of all the King's horses and all the King's men and all the folks to put Humpty back together again.
Heard.
Yes. So do we have an actual list at this point of the folks who, because we're talking about in the immediacy, it's not just about finding new enrollees, it's about extending people who are about to drop off that we think we need the money for immediately. Do we know how many folks there are in that position? Do we have a names list?
Not yet. And we're working through what it would take to do that. We're working through privacy issues. We're working through all kinds of things so that we can better estimate where they are and figure out how to have this conversation with both facilities and the service providers that help make that kismet without violating privacy and having people give their approvals. This is a tough, it's usually when you have a very tough problem, it's tough because, to solve it because it really is difficult. And we're trying the best we can to get in with you on a
Is it a
really
data issue with, I would
Some
think
of it is data.
that LAHSA or should have this information, like we should know who is, or the county should know who is in their treatment programs. Why is it so
Yes.
difficult?
It's, the county would have it. That's right.
Yes, the county would have the data, but it is patient-protected information, so we can't break it down to the individual yet, and we'll work with county to figure out what the exact number is.
These are ongoing, this is a conversation now with the county on a number of issues that I'm actually happy to tell you is more than 2 or 3 times a week, a discussion as we break through different barriers on all sides to get to this. And my own feeling is that as we work on these very hard issues, it lays the groundwork for real breakthroughs. We have to start in ways that everyone feels more comfortable, everyone's taking risks, everyone is stretching to do work differently. But I feel optimistic that we're looking at real breakthroughs with the county, a staff-to-staff, agency-to-agency relationship to make the data work. But you all know when you haven't done it ever, we have to start somewhere. We're beyond that now. We're 6 months in. It's better. But this would be the first time that we're actually matching up folks that have that kind of service to extend them.
We don't have the client data yet.
Not yet.
I mean, it's, again, it's hard. I mean, it does feel like we're flying a little bit blind without the client data, without the provider data. We're building this plane as we fly it.
We are.
Which makes me very uncomfortable as a steward of our finances here. Although, again, the thing that drives it is that we want to keep our foot on the accelerator. And so again, it comes down to, how much do we actually need immediately? What is the minimum amount that we need immediately to make sure that we are on the accelerator and that there's no risk of slowing down?
As I said, the mayor's request is a minimum $1/2 of the dollars, which is $11,739,487. That is her request.
Okay, but how do you back that up? I mean, that's just that's arbitrary. I mean, it's 50% of the total amount that we have for the settlements, which I understand, and it's a lot of money. But how do I was hoping, and I'm willing to go even that far, but I'm hoping to have the backup for why is that the number other than that it is 50%. I mean, in time-wise, I mean, for the next quarter, wouldn't it be 25%?
Her feeling is that given the urgency and giving the messaging of that we as a city, and this is inclusive, a feeling of all of you, so I'm not speaking just for the mayor, but that our message as a city to those with whom we will do business, including the county, is that we are absolutely serious, and that half of the money makes it clear that we will move forward with all of the parties that we must move forward with to contract and working with the county on all of the information and all that we will be required to set up a program that lasts. And she feels that the urgency of 50% sends that message. As I said, we will be back. Right, so we will be back with the full program. We'll be back with the contracts. You will see it. But the mayor feels that a minimum of half of the dollars is what is required to make clear the urgent commitment of the entire city council, not just the mayor.
And obviously we also need to figure out, is there a right amount that should be spent on prevention versus treatment? We want to make sure we're not just doing the typical harm reduction, but how do we come up with those models?
There should never be a reason to have an argument between harm reduction and treatment. Both are required. As Dr. Gonifer mentioned, LAHSA and others, there is actually a lot of harm reduction.
Oh no, we've swung
dollars,
way,
but nothing on
the
treatment.
pendulum has swung way into the harm reduction. We come to this all with that same idea that we have, or at least I do. The pendulum has swung very far. We need to be moving more toward treatments. We need to be enabling people to have sobriety, not just through these treatment programs, but frankly, even in a number of our interim interventions. I mean, I'm a believer that we should actually have some of our interim interventions should be sober interventions, where the folks that are there are all sober. I know, having spoken to so many people with lived experience and who are, that they go to some of these interventions, and it is so difficult. And this is why this is part of the motivation for this kind of thing. It's so difficult to get out of their addiction because they're surrounded by folks who are still addicted or who are enabling that behavior.
We've heard the exact same thing, and as we look at motels and other ways of doing this work, we're trying to understand how we would be able to segregate some hotels for specific types of services, not only on substance abuse, but also on things like domestic violence, for transition-aged youth. All of these things are now coming forward because we never provided this type of service before. It was amplified in the field, but not amplified through a program. And so we're struggling with that. We think it can be done, and as we move forward in this year, we will have many conversations as we try to redesign and come to you on what we think is the appropriate way and where they should be in order to provide these very specialized types of services. So there should never be, it's not one or the other, but what we can tell you, as you have generously said, there's no treatment offered.
And some of it is because some of the programs that we have rely on federal funds, which prevent us from being able to do this kind of thing. This is unique in the sense that I think we're free from some of those requirements as a settlement, depending on where the money comes. I saw the CLA look at me funny. Do you think we're not in that? Am I wrong about that?
No.
No? Okay, Mr. Kosker.
So I have a sense that the costs over 12 months wouldn't be even costs. There would be some heavier upfront costs securing the beds. I mean, we probably have to contract for the number of beds that would be sufficient for this program. And so I do understand both the show of commitment, which is why the mayor picks a number of 50%, and I do understand the chairperson's concern about 50% is a lot of the money. My sense is that if he came in, I mean, I'm for spending this money and I'm for making this commitment, and I get that this is important and an urgency, but it sounds like if we came to a number below 50 and above 0, we'd probably be good to go and be back here in 30 days and look at the remainder of the number. Is that something that makes sense? I'm actually asking everybody, is that something that makes sense for this committee? Because you're going to need a 3-0 vote to see money before this goes, or you'll have no recommendation in front of council.
I mean, that sounds reasonable to me, but did you want to comment on that?
We hear you. We understand. And as we all turn this corner together, this has been quite the 6 months, I want to say. As we turn this corner together on a new way of doing work, we will get out of we're doing everything for the first time. I feel a lot like when I was a young lawyer. You know, the first 5 years, I know I have friends here, the first 5 years you file any motion, it's the first time you file it, it's the first time you write it, it's the first time you make up the title. And that's what's happening here. Fortunately, we have experts, we have a lot of support, there's a lot of experience. But every time we're doing something right now, it is absolutely the first time. Mm-hmm. And that is also why service providers are looking at us like, is this real? Because it's never been done before. And so they want to know, and they've said to us, is there the commitment for me to set aside beds for that long? Will the money really be there? What are you doing? The county only goes as far. So it's what I'm trying to say is that it is new for everyone, not just in the building, but in the entire industry. You know, this is not how it's been done for years since the money was pulled back by the federal government. So people are also asking us, you know, can I believe you? If I set this aside, is this really going to happen? So it's not that I don't want to say to you and haggle a little bit. It's that the message that I bring isn't just from here within the building. It's the messages that we receive throughout the industry, and we are trying to set a new standard, a new expectation, and we want to be able to deliver throughout the city, particularly because we're not just talking about 1 or 2 providers. We are looking to be able to have providers throughout the city, in every district if we can, and also some outside of the city for those who should be treated right, for various reasons, including dangerous reasons, outside of their neighborhoods. So I'm giving you the very best answer I can from all of the folks who are in my ear as we are attempting to break ground on a new way of doing work together.
Okay, well, it seems that, I mean, we have to be somewhat arbitrary to land this plane, because ideally I was hoping to go into this with an actual number based on, you know, contracts, or based on the number of people that are currently about to go, that we could treat in, you know, something that's not just an arbitrary percentage. But given that we want to land this, we don't want to slow things down, I'm going to arbitrarily just say, how about a third, 33 1/3%, move it forward today. We're going to be back here in another month together, and then by then you'll have contracts, you'll have actual numbers, and frankly, you don't have to limit your contracts to the 33%. You can negotiate for bigger contracts. If you know, that's not, and maybe the CLA can speak to that, because I do think it's important, and I'm sorry to keep bringing you back into it, but I think it's important to understand that the money in the UB is set aside for substance abuse treatment, and the mayor's office is, under the emergency order, is able to make contracts. We're in that unusual place here, so it's not really, you know, we put forward a third of the money. That should be way more than enough that you're going to need to expend in the next month. But I don't think it limits you at all in terms of the ability to think big on these contracts. And I wanted the CLA to comment if I'm stating that incorrectly.
I don't think you're stating it incorrectly. The mayor's office does have the ability to begin and to negotiate these contracts. And I understand that they have been working on it, that nothing has come forward yet where they can make a determination on what their budget estimate would be for the next 3 months or even for the next year. Now, I am a little bit confused because, as you recall, during the budget process, we set aside $23 million, right, in the unappropriated balance for the mayor's office to come back with program guidelines. The mayor's office is, in this transmittal, if I'm understanding correctly, is asking for half of the monies to be transferred at this time. So half of the roughly 23 million. Mr. Chair, you threw out a number of 33 1/3%. Would it be 33 1/3% of what the mayor's office is asking for?
Of the 23.
Of the 23. So essentially, sir, what you're suggesting is that would be half of what the mayor's office is asking for. Because remember, they asked for about 23 million in total. There's 23 million total. The mayor's office has asked for half, right? Which is about $11.7 million. So if you're throwing out roughly a third, that would be almost about half of what they're asking for today. So I think that...
It would be 7 and it'd be more.
Yeah, 7, so that, but you're saying half of what they've asked for or a third of the total. A third of the total is 23 million. Are you saying a third of the 23?
Half of what they would be asking for would be 25%.
Would be 25%.
Right. A third is 33%.
Right. So that is where I'm confused. When you say a third, are you saying a third of the 23 or a third of what they are asking for today?
A third of the 23.
A third of the 23 is roughly about $7-8 million.
Right.
So then what I hear you saying, sir, is that it would be 8 million of the roughly 11.7 that they're asking for.
They're asking for 23.
Yes. No, they're asking for, in their transmittal, they're asking for 11.668.
Of the opioid?
Yes.
11.8.
And then
Yes.
11.8 from the tobacco settlement.
11.8 in the tobacco settlement is not contained in this transmittal, from what I can tell.
We're speaking about the entire amount, as you said, you're correct, about the entire amount that is in the UB, which is 23 million and change.
Okay, but your recommendations reflect only the 11.668, which means, if I'm understanding correctly, and maybe I'm looking at CAO, but the remaining amount of the tobacco settlement would remain actually still in the unappropriated balance.
So
And I think that's where the confusion is with the committee and what the mayor's office is asking for. The mayor's office, from what I understand, has only asked for half of the money that was moved to the UB.
So if,
Right? They've only asked for half the money that was moved to the unappropriated balance because the tobacco settlement was a part of this. So maybe that's where the confusion is. There was tobacco money of roughly 12 million. I'm just going to round it.
We were treating it all as one block.
Yeah, I know, you're treating it all in one block, but I think that's where there's confusion. So the tobacco portion of it is still going to remain in the UB. The mayor's office has only asked for the 11.6 million related to the opioid settlement. And so that's what they're asking for today. So that is roughly half of the total amount that was placed into the unappropriated balance.
if I may, Ed Gibson at the CAO's office. Sharon, as she reads particularly the recommendations, is seeing it one way, but when, as you consider this report, as it goes forward in consideration, we would have, the CAO's office would have an amendment to the recommendations to make it more clear. Because when you actually go through the beginning of this report, it starts off saying they're asking for all of the money, and I believe that was the intent, was to take all of that money, so it's the full 2023. So the amendment that would be read into the record is to clarify that in the recommendations, which
Well, that's a
was
very
handed out.
different, so
I
with all
know,
due
it's
respect, that's a very different recommendation than what is specified in the mayor's transmittal. So, but if that is the intent,
Right.
that they are
And I
asking
guess the
for
mayor's office handed something out separately, which was their,
I don't have that, sir, so I don't know what
Okay.
that is.
that is the problem.
Okay.
I was like, I knew you'd.
yeah.
So the CAO's office drafted, based on going through this, drafted the amendment so that the recommendations would reflect what the mayor's office request was.
Right. And the mayor's office request was basically to sweep all of the money into a separate account.
Correct.
To be determined how to spend in moving forward. So if we save a third of that, that's roughly
About 8 million, roughly.
7.825658333.
Yes, you're better at But that would be, yes, that would be a third. So a third of the total would be the roughly 7.8, blah, blah,
Yes,
blah, blah.
which should be more than enough to do everything that you need in the next month. And then to also realize that you don't have to limit your thinking to that amount of money, because you can be signing contracts or negotiating contracts that are year-long, and knock out one or two of those, and then you have, in 4 weeks, you'll be back here with the Homeless and Poverty Committee going through the process, having the council weigh in, having a public vetting, and then Budget Committee, we can move forward whatever additional money you need at that moment, even if it's, at that point, we want to do all of it. But at least we'll have that, process, and we will do it in a way that is, I think, more than ensuring that there is no deceleration of this movement toward treatment, because we back the mayor 100% on her desire to move people into treatment and to move in that model, and it makes a lot of sense. We just want to make sure that we go through this process and that we get the public. It's not just about us. It is about the public, and getting the most efficient and best program that we can. I have more detailed questions, but I'm going to pass on all of those because I think we're kind of landing somewhere that we can move forward. Colleagues, any additional comments or questions, or are we comfortable with this recommendation?
Well, I just want to be clear on procedurally what happened. So this recommendation passed out from, I guess, the CAO?
Yes.
The CAO trying to capture what the mayor was really asking for. And it would be 1/2 of the opioid settlement, and then a remainder, which I don't know what percentage it is, from the tobacco funds, for a total of 23 million. Is that what was being asked today?
Yes. And in discussions, it was settled that the mayor would request half of the 11 million of the entire amount today. We were seeking the entire amount to be swept, as was stated.
Half of what? Half of the opioid settlement being 11.6?
Of the combination, It's as Mr. Blumenfield said, it's that they are being treated as a block. They were treated as a block in the big budget as well. The combination of the opioid settlement and the tobacco settlement for 23 million.
23.5 million.
So today you were looking for 23 million.
Yes.
And your substitute suggestion would be a third of just opioid?
A third of each, so 7.825 total, which is a third of 23 million. So probably the easiest thing is just to do that evenly, a third of 11.6 and a third of 11.8, which is a 2.
Can I ask a question?
Yes.
Do you think that there's a scenario in which, because we're not going to be back for another 6 weeks at the earliest, right? And then to full council a week after that, maybe. Do you think there's a chance that you could use more than a third at this point? Or is it really, like you said, the messaging, the notion that this council fully supports the mayor and what she's trying to do, and also is easier to sell to service providers?
Well, of course there's a chance, because we're going to, you know,
You're going to go sign
we're
contracts.
going to move as quickly as we can. So yes, there's a chance, because we're not going on recess, and so we're moving ahead. Nonetheless, I hear you and want to be cooperative and understand that we can go forward and contract. I think it's important that you've said so, so that then it isn't said, well, why are you moving so quickly? Why didn't you come back? So because you've said that, I feel better about it. Nonetheless, we are preparing to move as soon as you agree.
Okay. So there is a motion on the table to appropriate a third of 11,668 and a third of 11,810, which I can either do the math on or we can just figure that out, and then for a total of 7.825 today, and to authorize the funds in the opioid settlement account and the substance use treatment disorder line item in the general city purposes fund to be administered by the mayor, with funds to be expended by the city CAO as authorized and directed by the mayor. Basically taking CAO's language that you sent us and just changing the numbers. Colleagues, any thoughts or concerns on that? If not, then I guess we'll call for a roll call.
Mr. Chair, we'll need a second for that motion.
Needs a second. To second the motion for the 7.18 million.
I'm sorry, I think the delta is just too much for me. I mean, here's the thing, and I'm sorry to belabor this point, but I see 11.6 as the 50% already.
Okay.
And so if, in the spirit of your 1/3, it would be 1/3 of the total, the 23.
Correct.
And I don't know the total of the tobacco. Is the tobacco 23.6?
Tobacco is 11.8.
Oh, here and here, but is this one half? Is this?
No, this is total. The 11 and the 11, correct.
What the total pot that's available to draw down for each of those funds?
What you see in front of you there is if we were to sweep the entirety of everything. That would be the annual, that's all we have in the bank, so to speak, 11.6 plus 11.8.
So when the mayor was saying 50% of, the mayor was looking for, your recommendation was 50% of the 23?
Correct.
Okay, I'll second it.
Okay. Moved and seconded.
And just to clarify, the total would be $7,825,000.
$7,825,658.33.
And don't forget the 33 cents.
Understood.
It's actually 33 cents.
I'll add $1 for a Coke.
Understood. So moved by Blumenfield, second by McOsker. We'll go into the roll call. Blumenfield?
Aye.
Yaroslavsky?
Yes.
McOsker?
Yes.
3 ayes, and that item has been approved as amended.
Thank you very much.
Great, thank you. that takes us then to, where are we? Sorry about this here. Item 10.
Item number 10, 2022-23 budget recommendation relative to motion Hernandez-Yaroslavsky to transfer $1,500,000 from the general city purposes opioid settlement line item to a new program in the general city purposes fund entitled Council District 1 MacArthur Park Harm Reduction Center. This item has been approved by the Neighborhoods and Community Enrichment Committee on
This we're going
June
to,
7th.
my recommendation that we continue this. This hasn't been heard in Homeless and Poverty Committee yet. We put it forward here because if we were spending all of the money, then we would be effectively eliminating this. But since we have not spent all of the money, this can go through the regular order of things. It's also, there's issues with this we would need to discuss. But so my recommendation on this is that we can, well, I guess as the chair, I can just continue that. So no need to take a vote. That item is continued. So moving to 11.
Item number 11, motion Hernandez-McCosker and Price, and amending motion Hernandez-Soto-Martinez and Harris-Dawson relative to settlement agreement modification in the case of Christian Rodriguez et al. Versus City of Los Angeles in connection with class member services and related matters. Only recommendation number 1 from the motion, Hernandez-McCosker Price, is referred to the Budget, Finance, and Innovation Committee.
Do we have staff on this item? And this was the one that I read the amendment in at the beginning. Just good afternoon, welcome.
Good afternoon, council members. Susie Rios Bellinat with the City Administrative Officer, and I'm joined by my colleagues at EWDD.
Good afternoon, council members. I'm Gerardo Rubalcaba, Assistant General Manager with the Economic and Workforce Development Department.
Hi, Donnie Brooks, Economic Workforce Development Department, Adult Workforce Operations Manager.
So this was a motion introduced by Council District 1. We don't have a formal presentation prepared for you on this, but we're happy to answer any questions you may have.
Great. Has the settlement agreement been extended yet?
So that is the action requested as part of Recommendation 1 today, is to extend the settlement agreement program for 1 additional year based on your amendment that you introduced at the start of the meeting.
So would the city attorney have to revisit the settlement negotiations, return to court in order to expand the scope of services provided, or can we do that unilaterally?
I will defer that question to City Attorney.
Yeah, and unfortunately, our city attorney was not here today. We'll have to defer to him to answer the question, but I think our understanding is that it will require a renegotiation of the agreement to expand the scope of work.
Okay. And can any of the funds be used to address dormant gang areas? Like, for example, we put $50,000 toward our gang prevention organization, Reseda, even though there weren't, active gangs there, or there were, but it had been part of the previous class part.
And I'm sorry, can you repeat the question? I missed the first part.
Can any of the funds be used to address dormant gang areas?
Our understanding is, or my understanding is that the settlement is only related to the 26 gang injunction areas that were named in the settlement.
Okay, I guess we'd have to make those changes moving forward.
Yes.
Colleagues, any comments or questions on this? Okay, then I'm going to just recommend that we move forward with this as amended.
Blumenfield.
Blumenfield, aye.
Yaroslavsky.
Yes.
McCosker.
Yes.
3 ayes, and the item has been approved as amended.
Great, thank you.
Thank you.
All right. Next item is 13.
Item number 13, City Attorney Report relative to a request for attorney's fees pursuant to the ruling in Yes in My Backyard et al. Versus City of Los Angeles, and the Planning and Land Use Committee waived consideration of this matter.
start with a question. Does this, I just wanted to know, does approval of this matter complete all pending litigation in this case?
This would complete this litigation. It should. I do want to alert Donna Wong for the Land Use Division of the City Attorney's Office. I do want to alert the committee to an amended report that was transmitted to the council file earlier today, report number 23-0243. That report amends our original report dated April 17th because of a notice of substitution of counsel that changed the payee name for the payment of attorney's fees from Zachs, Friedman, and Patterson to Patterson and O'Neill. And so that was transmitted to the council file today. We also are requesting that amended report with the June 26th date be amended by interlineation to just clarify the delivery instructions of the check to the firm of Patterson and O'Neill instead of what's now stated as Zachs, Friedman, and Patterson.
Certainly sounds technical in nature, and we're happy to do that.
So.
I don't want to speak for my colleagues, but I'm sure we're all happy for that. Okay, and so is there any other litigation on this case that's out there, or is it?
No, this would be the last item. We would need to file a return with the court, just a responsive document to the court indicating that the council's action setting aside its original determination is done and that the payment of attorney's fees is done. It would obviously be up to the court to discharge the writ.
Okay, great. Great, then the recommendation is to approve the city attorney's recommendations as amended.
Blumenfield,
Blumenfield, aye.
Yaroslavsky,
Yes.
McCosker.
Yes.
3 ayes, and the item has been approved as amended.
Great. We couldn't hear you, by the way, but I assume you said it's been approved.
It's been approved as amended.
Yes. Okay, thank you.
Thank you.
And will you confirm that clears the open items, and we have closed session next, right? Is there anything else open?
That's correct. We can go into closed session.
Okay, if we could clear the room for closed session. Use the restroom.
We are now in open session.
Okay, we're in open session.
Mr. Chair, so there is an action on hand to approve a set of recommendations for item number 15. If you'd like, I could read those recommendations.
Yes, if you could read those in.
For item 15, I'll read the recommendations. 1, to decertify the environmental impact report for the project entitled Sidewalk Repair Program adopted on June 22nd of 2021. Case numbers 14-0163-S3 and CEQA SCH 2016071063. Recommendation number 2, rescind the project's CEQA findings, including the statement of overriding considerations adopted for the project. Number 3, sets aside the ordinance number 187106. Number 4, rescind the project's street tree policy and mandatory project features policy, which are codified at Los Angeles Municipal Code section 62.104.1. And number 5, adopt the attached draft ordinance attached to the council file.
Okay, if you could call the roll on that.
Yes. Blumenfield.
Blumenfield, aye.
Yaroslavsky.
Yes.
McCosker.
Yes.
3 ayes, and those recommendations are now approved.
All right, will you confirm that clears the desk?
That clears the desk.